Hello, I'm SB Moores, and today I want to make a little video about Harlow from Toll the Hounds. Um, the reason, well, first I should say this is going to be full spoilers for Toll the Hounds, and I'll probably talk about the themes present throughout all of the Malazan Book of the Fallen, but I will not mention anything outside of Toll the Hounds, so no Dust of Dreams spoilers, and I won't even talk about stuff from before Toll the Hounds, even though if you're watching this, I would assume you've read all of those books. So only spoilers for Toll the Hounds. But I wanted to make a video about Harlow. And the reason that I wanted to make a video about Harlow is because to me, he is a his storyline and him himself are big encapsulations of a lot of the themes present throughout Toll the Hounds, as well as a lot of the themes present throughout the Malazan Book of the Fallen. His plotline, personally, was very interesting. At times, I was getting a little bored, but the ending and the things it sets in motion started to really form together, and I started getting this clearer idea, clearer idea of why Harlow was included in the book, besides being a set piece to move people into these certain positions. But I also was have started to really think about why he was in the book, like why his particular plot is the way it is, why he continued to get focus afterward. And I found that Harlow is, to me, kind of the marrow of the bone that is Toll the Hounds, if that makes any sense. It's like the knuckle bone of the Malazan Book of the Fallen series. It's the Malazan Book of the Fallen series shaved knuckle in the hole is what Toll the Hounds is. If that makes any sense, if it didn't know well, but that's what it is to me. And his themes were very profound, I feel, for this book. So without further ado, let's head in. Quick little rundown of what happens to Harlow. We all know the story. Stunning Monachus's child that was born out of the tragic event that unfolded. Well, I guess this is spoilers for Memories of Ice. The tragic event that happened to Stani Monachus. And it resulted in Harlow being born. And as we know, he is sent to live with the family of the child Snell. Snell is a cruel young boy who ends up attacking him brutally, and then outside of the city gates of Dargistan, where he's found and then sold off to a quarry mine, where he then suffers in a quarry mine. And then, as we know, this sets off many things in motion that has kind of a ripple effect throughout the series, that has stuff to do with Cutter, Murillo especially, Bellum Nam, and consequently, because it has something to do with all of them, it affects the Phoenixan regulars and Dargistan as a whole. As well as, quite obviously, it affects Stani Monachus as well, and her plotline throughout this book. But um, the first thing I'll go straight from the beginning, and I'll just keep going. Harlow's story at the start has some very terrible and very sad ideas that follow it, that really stem from his and Snell's relationship together. And while there's also his relationship with Stani Monachus, that is in itself very tragic on from multiple angles. Um, Snell's is the first one that really gets something really happens, because at the beginning of the story, Harlow and Stani's story is kind of stagnated almost, I guess you could say. It seems as if everything has happened already. This is the way it is. Stani cannot bear to be with Harlow, and so Harlow lives with a different family, and that is that at the start. But obviously, because of what Snell does, um, the very cruel things that he does to Harlow, the bullying, the lying, and the attack, all paint a very almost not nihilistic, but a very cynical view of the world, which is a theme that is decently followed throughout this book. Although the cynicism, and I'll get to it more by the end of this, the cynicism is not the point of this book. It's more the opposite of how the world isn't as cynical as it may seem. At least that's the opinions that I was able to draw from this. But what I mean by this is something that Krupe says that I'm going to paraphrase, some ideas that he brings forth about Snell and about Harllo. And one of those is that Harllo is a young, smart, and kind boy, and Snell is not. And for that reason, Snell does not like Harllo and bullies him for it. And the cynical idea that comes from this is that the world itself is in such a way that kind-hearted people or young smart people or people in general that try not to do wrong, that try and be kind and nice, that try and be good people are preyed upon by those who are not, simply by virtue of the fact that they themselves don't possess those same qualities. Snell is not kind. He's not able to be kind. He doesn't possess the capacity for it. And for this reason, he hates Harllo, because Harllo is the exact opposite of him. Um, while the hate is indiscriminate when it comes from Snell, because Snell hates everybody. He hates his parents, he hates his little sisters, he hates the world. The only person that Snell cares for is himself. He has no empathy, he has no compassion, he has no kindness in his heart. And it's honestly a very sad idea when you look at this child who has nothing in him but hatred and bad ideas and wants to do bad things all to benefit himself, and that's all he can think of. That is the limit of his capacity of what he's able to do. And this idea that kind people are preyed upon by those who are not for this reason is, in my opinion, deeply cynical. It's deeply of the idea that people are looking out only for themselves and that the world itself is just a cruel place to be. Um, unkind things happen to kind people all the times, and bad people have what you could call good things happen to them all the time. Although we will see this rectified later on, which speaks to the larger themes of the book, and the Malazan Book of the Fallen series. But that really sets in motion the tone for the beginning of Harlow's story and sort of the arc that is followed from the events that unfold. Obviously, Harlow's then sent to the camps, and there's a parallel that I drew when I read this book between Snell and another character, which is Gaz, with some ideas that are also presented by Krupe about Gaz. And one of these is, in my opinion, Snell is a younger Gaz, or Gaz is an older Snell, or Gaz is the final form of Snell. Although I feel as if Snell would have been worse. Like the table. Um, and the reason I think this is because Gaz himself is an unkind man. He is a fingerless murderer who stalks the Gajobi district outside of taverns and bars, uh, just seeking to kill people. And there's a specific line, even though he's been killing people for quite a while, and it's because he's so dissatisfied with his life, and he's dissatisfied with his wife. And they even mention at one point where Gaz thinks to himself, he kills other people to satiate anger he holds towards Thordy, his own wife. Because as he puts it, if he kills other people, he can put off killing her for another week, or beating her really bad for another week. And there's one scene in particular that was very telling about how small Gaz's mind is, in my opinion, and how cruel it is. Because it's the scene, or it's the event where Thordy starts to put lintel stones on top of her own garden, which is, there's less space for her gardening because of this. And it's not something most people would do. It doesn't make any sense why she's doing this. It's not adding walk space. It's not doing anything but taking up garden space. But it doesn't do anything really bad as well. It's just a thing she's doing. From all outside perspectives, it affects nobody. It doesn't affect Gaz, it doesn't affect her, it doesn't affect their home especially. But it makes Gaz so fundamentally angry that he has to go out and kill people to take out this anger, so that he doesn't kill her instead. And Krupe, I believe, is the one who narrates this specific idea, is that this was because it was not normal. It was not part of the status quo that was Gaz's life. And this small perturbation in the day to day for Gaz is just this small thing that really does not affect him in any way somehow is able to inspire such animus and rage and wrath in him that he goes out and kills people. And it feels the same with Snell because kindness doesn't do anything. It can do big things, but Harlow's kindness in particular wasn't doing anything to even discomfort Snell. Snell is just that way. He is just a bully. He bullies Harlow because he does not like this kindness, and he doesn't like Harlow for it. He sees Harlow have good things happen to him, what with getting Gruntle's affection and other such things, and it makes him so mad that he attacks him, and it results in Harlow getting sent to the mines. So that's a parallel that I drew that relates a little bit to Harlow with Snell and Gaz. Um, and then obviously we see another theme start to arise, and that is love. And it especially is present in Stani Manakis, as well as Snell's own parents. But I won't talk about them quite as much. I'll talk about Stani here. It's very interesting because, by all accounts, at the very beginning of this story, it seems as if Stani holds nothing but hatred for Harlow. And it's a very complex and difficult situation. And honestly, his plotline is one that doesn't really dip into the fantastical very often. Um, because this is an event that could theoretically be have happened or is happening currently in our own world, with people around the world. Um, and a lot of questions and a lot of ideas can arise just from Stani and Harlow's initial relationship at the start, at this point when Harlow goes missing, when he disappears. And it shows that even despite what had happened to Stani and the fact that she couldn't stand to see Harlow, she still loved him. It was just she couldn't show it and she couldn't muster it up when she actually saw him. And it's honestly a very heartbreaking moment when Murillo goes to the dueling school and we find out about his disappearance, and Stani is a wreck. And she's depressed because of it. She is thrown into a very, very deep depression. And one point throughout the book, Murillo even thinks to himself, if they can't find Harlow soon, she's going to kill herself. Which honestly broke my heart to read. It was so incredibly sad to read this, of how she struggled so much with Harlow about being around him, and it seemed as if she couldn't have any love for him. And then it turns out that she had all the love a mother does have for her child. And to see how deeply it affected her was very, very sad. I don't know any other way to describe it. It was very morose, very um just depressing part of this book. But it's also very powerful because it shows the love that people have for one another and for a parent and their child, especially in this particular instance with Stani and Harlow, where even despite all the hardships that Stani has faced, that resulted in Harlow and that came from where Harlow, how he was created, it is just it's almost beautiful in a sense to see how she still loves him despite all of these troubles, all these trials and tribulations. And uh, beyond this, we with Harlow, those same cynical themes of an unkind world that preys on those who are good continues when he goes to the mine with such characters as I can't think of his name. I think it's Venaz, I believe, which is kind of similar to Gaz in the end. But Venaz is one of the boys who's also in the mines, one of the young boys, and he despises Harlow for the fact that Bainisk, who's the older boy in the mines, likes Harlow because Harlow's nice and he tells him stories about the city, and Harlow is kind to him. And those are traits that make him likable. He's a likable person, and Venaz is not. And because of this, Venaz begins to hate Harlow and prey upon him just in the same way that Snell did and how Gaz does to random people behind bars. And this cynical idea is pushed further beyond this, but at the same time, there is hope in it because there are such characters as Bainisk who give Harlow this friendship, who try and protect Harlow. And this is further presented as we go forward with things happening in Dargistan with Murillo. Because Murillo sees how distraught Stani becomes over the disappearance of her child, and he immediately snaps into action. He's just met her. He doesn't know this child at all, and the first thing he does is he starts pooling his influence and his resources, and he says, "We're going to find this child. We're going to find this missing kid who could presumably be suffering, who could presumably be in danger." And it's honestly a very hopeful look when you compare it with all of these other ideas that have been presented so far. And this is what I mean when I say that the cynicism that is presented with this is not the main theme that shines through. It is the compassion and the love and the kindness and the goodness of people that really shines through. And Murillo is sort of that first beacon that really shows it because even though he is partially doing this because he's becoming attracted to Stani Manakis and he's beginning to have uh, deeper feelings for her and he doesn't like to see her so upset. He also has this idea that there is a young boy missing who is possibly suffering. And that's just an injustice of the world that he's not able to abide by. And it's something that needs to be rectified. And it's something that needs to be fixed. And that itself really shows the compassion that people like Murillo can hold for other people. He doesn't even know this boy. He doesn't know Thani really at this point, at the beginning when he immediately is like, we got to find this missing kid. And those themes to me were the strongest throughout this book. And they were really heartwarming and they really offset how sad everything in this book was for a lot of it. And I'll get to some of the other themes because I feel like I said, Harlow and everything that happens with him is the marrow of the bone that creates or that is Toll the Hounds with some of the themes and a lot of the other events that are going on, such as with Animander Rake and other people. But beyond this, we see a progression of Harlow being in these mines and suffering essentially not essentially just slavery. He is a slave, and this is another injustice of the world that is presented here in this book, and it relates to Gorlas Vidikas as well as it ends up pulling in Cutter at the end for multiple reasons, but it shows because Gorlas Vidikas is the same as Gaz and as Snell, he's just rich. That's the big difference, is that he has influence and he has power. And it's even stated by by Snell that when he's older, he wants to be rich and be able to do whatever he wants, be it cruel things or be it things that comfort himself, even if they're cruel to other people and they make other people suffer. And in a sense, Gorlas Vidikas is that person. And earlier I said that Harlow, I believe, is like a younger Gaz, or Gaz is an older Harlow. But I would also say that if somehow Snell could become rich, he would just be Gorlas Vidikas, which in itself is a terrible thing to think because Gorlas Vidigas has all these influence. He's one of the most important people in Darajistan. He's a council member. And that's a dark idea in itself that such a person could arise to such a position with such cruelty in their heart. And Gorlas Vidicas's cruelty extends to people that he presumably should like and love too, such as Chalice Vidicas. And it's really it's definitely shown how this is an older Snell almost because, or this is how Snell would be, because just like Snell, Gorlas Vidicas's hate is indiscriminate. He doesn't even like his allies. Gorlas Vidicas genuinely doesn't like anybody. And his ideas about people are just cruel in a sense. I mean, with the people who work in that quarry mine, which Harllo was sent to, that's his mine. And you can see the way that he treats his own foreman, where he purposefully overcharges him. And then at one point, he even thinks to himself, oh, if he had realized that I was um, lying to him, or if he realized that I was charging him an unfair rate, I would have just killed him and replaced him with someone else so I could have taken the money anyway. And it really shows how expendable other people's lives are to people like Snell and Gaz and Gorlas Vidikas. And it shows that bullies like these can sometimes get on top. They can sometimes be the people who are successful. And that's part of that cynical idea. But we'll get more into that because I know I'm saying cynical quite a bit, but to me, that's what this entire storyline was for a lot of it. It's cynical, very, very cynical things happening where it just seems that the world is full of cruel and unkind people doing cruel and unkind things to those who are anything but that. But it's offset by overwhelming compassion and love for other people, with people like Murillo who's trying his hardest to get this boy back to his mother, by people like Banis, who are trying his hardest to protect Harllo from the horrors of the other children that are in the mines, because Harllo is one of those few souls who is kind and who is good. And it is it continues up until a point where Murillo finally figures out where he thinks Harlow went, and he goes and he I believe it's mentioned by Golas Vidikas, he brings so much money that it's like a small fortune almost. That this is a ridiculous amount to be paying for at least in Gorlas's mind, this is a ridiculous amount to pay for one boy. And Murillo sadly dies in this endeavor, trying to save Harlow and trying to mend uh Stani Monachus's pain that she's feeling because of all this. And another character appears in this storyline, which is a student at the dueling school that Stani Monachus and Murillo are running, which is Velam Na, who's a young noble boy who is kind of the antithesis or the exact opposite. He's the antonym of the name Gorlas Vidikas, is what he is. Because he has been raised in a rich household. He's part of the richer side of the Nam family. Um, and yet he is kind. And to me, it almost seemed as if he was looking at the actions of Murillo and thinking to himself, this is the kind of nobleman I want to be. That's what I gathered. And but he has a slight more edge to the way that he deals with these events because he ends up getting sort of a vengeance on Snell for what he's doing. He finds Snell trying to smother his two baby infants, and it really shows the good-hearted nature of people, especially with Bellam Nam in this particular moment, because the first thing he does when he finds Snell doing this is he doesn't think, "Oh, I'm going to take revenge for Snell." He immediately thinks to himself, "What have you done to these kids? We have to make sure they're all right." And that's what he does. And he gets mad, and this is where that sort of edge comes with Bellam Nam, because his sort of justice is a little more visceral than Murillo's might be, because Murillo was willing to pay to get Harllo back. He didn't even want to have anything to do with Gorlas Vidigas. He's like, I don't care. He's just some evil guy. I just want Harllo back. I just want this kid back. I don't want to take revenge on Gorlas Vidigas, who may have had a hand in this, who is continuing the suffering of this child. He just wants to get the kid back to his mother. And Belam Nam takes the a similar but like I said, more visceral approach where he's like, I'm gonna get a little bit of revenge. I'm gonna give Snell a little bit of his own medicine for what he's done to Harllo. And while I will say it is a shame that any kid is being, psychologically messed with in this book, if anybody deserved it, it was probably Snell. Although I will say there is probably a sad case you can make for Snell where it seems as if, and Krupe says it, he does not have the capacity to be kind or have any compassion or love in him. And that in itself is just sad for him. Because as we see time and time again throughout this book and throughout the series, love is so much stronger and so much and better feeling for people than all of these terrible things that other people are feeling. Uh, Even though a lot of good people in this series and in this book end up dying or going into terrible situations, such as Harllo, there are a lot of bad people that also experience these same things and end up just living terrible lives, be it their own faults or with the case of Snell, and this is the case that I was making from possibly you could argue that his life was sad, is that he just simply couldn't. He does not have the capacity. It almost borderlines on a possible mental disorder or condition, in my opinion. Now, I'm not too well versed in psychology or any such things, but immediately to my mind, in a pop culture and just knowledge, just random information that I have sort of way, it reminds me of a sociopath or a psychopath, I forget which, but where you cannot feel any emotions that involve love or kindness or compassion or empathy. Um, and that was present within Snell. And it almost, if anything, it makes me feel sorry for Snell, even though I don't like him in the absolute slightest. And I'm glad that he ended up getting a little bit of his payback for what he did to Harllo, even though Harllo suffered much more than Snell ever could or ever did. Because even though Belam Nam decides to get this little vengeance on him, he doesn't actually do anything bad to him. I believe he hits him once or twice, which is obviously terrible, but um, he tells him, "Oh, I'm going to send you to the work camps. I'm going to send you to a terrible, terrible place where children go and they never come back." And he sends him to his uncle. And then he talks with his uncle afterward, and he thinks to himself, it's like, "Oh, this is just where young boys go to apprentice somewhere. I'm not, nothing's bad is going to happen to Snell. He's just going to sit in a cage for a day and get scared out of his mind." That's what Snell's going to do. And then presumably after this book, Snell was probably put to work in some way or another, and he probably hated it, and he probably continued to hate everything and everybody around him. And who knows, Snell probably may have ended up like Gaz later in life, because I doubt that he ever got rich. I have a feeling that never was going to happen for Snell. But with Bellum Nom, and Murillo, all working to find this boy, it really shines through with that compassion. And then obviously, and Banus. And then we continue forward, and more of this injustice and tragedy is shown, where when Gorlas Vidikas realizes that there's a young boy in his quarry mine that Murillo wants, the first thing he thinks is, bring him to me. And you can only imagine what Gorlas Vidikas is going to do, because he has such hate for everybody around him, and he trivializes other people's lives so much that he thinks, oh, I own Harllo, I'm going to do bad things to him just because Murillo wanted him. And he seeks to torture the Phoenix and regulars, which are Murillo's friends, by sending him Murillo's corpse, which obviously sadly results in, I believe it's Arilta, sadly killing herself later in the book, realizing that all of her friends are dying and that she's getting older. And I believe it's even mentioned that um, her age is addling her mind as time goes on, which itself is sad. But beyond this, as we know, sadly, they realize that somebody's looking for Harllo, and Cutter realizes that Murillo is dead, and it was Gorlas Vidikas that did it. So this sets in motion numerous set pieces, as now Cutter is given that final push he needs to move in on Gorlas Vidikas, and also Bainisk realizes him and Harllo need to get out. And there's one thing about the relationship I want to talk about before we continue along with the story. And that is to do with the stories that Harlow has been telling Bainisk. And I feel like they show, maybe I'm using the word a little too much, but I don't know too many synonyms, the kindness that Harlow possesses. Is that Bainisk has lived his entire life in squalor in these mining pits as a slave, which is terrible. And his life has been honestly nothing but suffering. And he meets Harlow, this boy who's from the city, and he's asking him all these questions and these ideas about the city. And Harlow tells him that the city is a perfect place where everybody lives with their ma and da, and they live in families that love each other. Everybody has all the bread that they could eat. They never go hungry, and everybody is happy. There are no cruel people in the city. It's a utopia almost, is the way that Harlow presents it, which, in my opinion, is a fundamentally kind thing to try and give Banis, because you also have to think that Harlow is a young boy at this point, and he doesn't have the idea to himself that if they ever got out and Bainisk really saw how the world was, that that might hurt Bainisk, that it isn't what Harlow's telling him. But in a sense, Harlow is doing him a kindness because he doesn't want to break this illusion of a perfect place in the world. This idea that Bainisk grasps onto that gives him something to be hopeful and look forward to. And that in itself to me is shows the goodness that's in Harlow's heart. And then sadly, as we continue, eventually it gets to that point where they can't see the bottom of the pit, and Bainisk has to make that split-second decision to drop themselves into that pit, or they're going to get caught by Venaz, who is going to do terrible things to Harlow. I believe Venaz even thinks to himself that he's going to rough Harlow up a bit, just enough not to kill him before he gives him to Gorlas Vidikas. And it also shows that same self-serving attitude that a lot of people have in this book, where all Venaz can think to himself is, I'm going to become Gorlas Vidikas's favorite. I'll be the next foreman, and I'll live a good life after this. And all he thinks about is himself. And he thinks afterward, it's like, oh, then people like Bainisk and Harlow can suffer under me, which is depressing. It's a cynical and depressing idea. Um, and sadly, Bainisk dies on this fall. His head is crushed. Harlow survives. He was far enough down the rope that he was fine, but Bainisk was not, and he ends up crushing his skull on the side of the thing, and it's broken. And Harlow wants to take him with him, but he realizes Bainisk is not going to be able to move again. Bainisk is not surviving a few moments past this. And so the last thing that Harlow does with Bainisk is he tells him about the city. And he tells him how kind it is. And he tells him how everyone lives with their ma and da, where they're living in happy families and they can eat all the bread that they want. And it's a utopia, basically. And then Bainisk dies. And genuinely, this was a scene that made me put the book down and really think about what had just happened, because this was so incredibly sad that Bainisk dies in this way, and Harlow chooses to give him a better idea of what the world is like. And it's honestly what Stephen Erickson, I believe, is telling us about the world in this book. That despite all of these cruel things, Harlow it almost comes to a point where Harlow believes these, in my opinion, and I do believe that Harlow believes these in the end. Not in a very literal sense, but he believes more in the core idea that the world is a good place and there are good people in it. Because obviously, this world that Harlow has been describing to Bainisk is not what the world is like in Darajistan. Because he lived in a poor family that was struggling to scrape by, with his real mother not wanting anything to do with him, as far as he understood. But even then, he is kind and he loves them all. And he gives this idea to Bainisk of his idea of the world, which may not be true, but he seems to believe in wholeheartedly. And obviously, despite what had happened to Murillo, we get another sense of justice that comes after this when Cutter finally comes back, finally makes it to the mining camp, and he wants to continue Murillo's goal in finding Harlow, but he also wants revenge for Murillo. So this is an instance where you can say that Cutter's goals are not quite righteous, in the same sense as maybe Belam Nam and Murillo's were, but they were still good and kind-hearted. And he gets this an even more brutal revenge than Belam Nam did, where Gorlas Vidikas finally dies. And I like the parallel that's drawn between that fight and Murillo's, because in Murillo's sense, he wanted a fight to first blood, who nicks the first wound. And then which is what Gorlas suggested. And then afterward, Gorlas essentially tells his foreman, yeah, if anyone asks, that's not what we're going to say. We're going to say it was a duel to the death from the start. And that's what we're going to do, because Gorlas just wants to kill people. They even mention he has a penchant for killing people in his duels. And obviously not when they want to. Um, and I really like how in this fight, Gorlas Vidikas is like, oh, this guy probably doesn't even know how to fight. I'm probably so much better than him. And admittedly, Gorlas Vidikas was a great fighter because he was able to, even an aging Murillo was probably still a great duelist. He was able to sadly kill him. But um, he even dispenses with the rules and it gets flipped on him, where immediately funk funk or thunk thunk funk funk thunk thunk, two daggers in his chest, and he is dead. And this also shows sort of how this bullying idea of the world is cyclical as well, because there are people like, and it was also shown in the Belam Nam interactions with Snell, where Snell bullies someone and he thinks of himself as never being able to get bullied like that. Like his life might be terrible now, but it's going to be great. So Belam Nam bullies him and shows him that it can come right back at him. And it will come right back at him, almost karma in a sense. And Gorlas Vidikas has the same thing happen to him afterward, especially with his foreman, who immediately grabs the bag of coins from Gorlas's body, and he just thinks to himself, "Oh well, another new noble's going to own this place, and I'm going to have to suck up to him too." But that's just the way of the world. Nobles come and go, just as foremans might come and go, as Gorlas Vidikas thought. To Gorlas Vidikas, the foreman was a small man who worked under him, who lived a meaningless life that was only given meaning by people like Gorlas Vidikas. And then we're shown that it's the same thing right back around. Gorlas Vidicus's life had no meaning in the end. And he was just a means to an end for the foreman as well to get his paycheck. Even if he had to suck up to him and it was terrible. But at this point, Cutter thinks that Harllo is dead and he returns back to Darajistan, and it's very sad what happens to him because he ends up just leaving behind his friends without saying one final goodbye, because he cannot. This is not the same city that Cutter lived in back when he was Crocus Younghand. And that in itself is a sad storyline. But back to more of the stuff related to Harllo. Belam Nam ends up finding him. And it's kind of funny how I think immediately, even though Belam Nam has just broken his arm, I believe, fighting Venaz, uh, it was almost kind of funny to me how Harllo just sort of like peeps his head up and he's like, "Hey, who are you? I'm Harllo." And they ride back to the city. And the ending of this book with Harllo, in my opinion, is the essence of what Toll the Hounds was. And it's the reason I think it's the core of this book, and why Harllo and the myriad storylines related to him are the core of this book. And it is because when he goes back and finally sees his mom, he whispers something that no one can hear. And I'll get to that. But him and his mom have a little back and forth where she is crying because her son is missing. And then he finally returns and she's crying, and Harlow's happy that he's finally back. And then she says to him, "But I just can't remember anything good from that time." Referring, of course, to the events that led to Harlow's conception, um, which were terrible, horrible, which was a terrible, horrible, despicable event that happened. But then you have Harlow, who counters with, "But there was me. I was good." And that was a very, very powerful, sad thing to say, in my opinion. But it was also very hopeful because Harlow's essentially telling. He can tell that his mother loves her at this point, and he loves his mother, despite them living apart his entire life, despite the fact that it seems to him, from every interaction he's had with her, that she hates him. And yet, he still loves her, and he also loves himself. And he shows this by saying that he is good. He's a good thing that he's here, that it happened, that he's not that it happened, but that he was born. It's a good thing that he's alive. And the next lines that Krupe narrates were genuinely, I reread them like 6 times over. And it went something along the lines of, and Stani Monakas let herself look at Harllo in a way she never had before. And that pretty much did it. She didn't know how she was going to manage it. She did not know how, but she was going to manage it. Which shows the love that is truly the essence of this book. The themes of love that show up in this particular instance, where despite everything that's happened, she finally is at a point where she's like, I love my son Harllo and I want to be with him. I know it's going to be hard. I know it's going to be a struggle for me. I know it's going to be painful and difficult. But despite all of this, love is what wins out in the end. Both Harlow's and both the people of the world in general, with people like Marillion and Bellam Nam and Banus. And what was that thing that Harllo said that no one heard in that shadow? It was this, of course. See, Banus, this is my mother. And I think that that was the best way to end this book, to end Toll the Hounds. And I believe that those lines really encapsulate Harlow's plotline and those themes perfectly, with these ideas that Harllo looks upon his mother, who has presumably hated him this whole time, who he's only had negative interactions with. And you got to keep in mind all those things that he told Baines about how everyone lives with loving mothers and fathers. And to that, he gives a response to it. He gives credence to what he said by saying, you see, this is my mother. I was not lying. My mother loves me, and I love my mother. And to me, it was genuinely one of the best scenes in the book. This, to me, was one of my favorite plot lines that's appeared within the Malazan Book of the Fallen. And I think it's very interesting because it's also one of those plot lines that doesn't have a lot of the fantastical put into it. Nothing really outlandish or mystical happens in this plot line except for the one instance where Harllo finds a Talana mass in the mines. And that was sort of like a one-off scene that didn't have anything to do with it afterward. But it also kind of shows Harlow's kindness because he chose not to tell anybody about it. So you could also draw that parallel. But to me, this was one of my favorite scenes in the entire book was that final scene. And it was one of my favorite plot lines. And I really think it encapsulates those core ideas of love, compassion, empathy, and kindness that are present throughout this book. And it really pierces straight through and destroys those ideas of cynicism that are throughout. It shows that while there might be cynical people in the world, and there might be people in the world that are self serving and that will bully the kind for no other reason, it shows that in the end, all these other ideas are much stronger than those. And I believe that for that reason, this was one of the most interesting and profound plot lines in Toll the Hounds. But that was just some of my ideas that I had about it, some of my thoughts on it, how I rationalized everything, and how I went about it. Um, I hope that you enjoyed the video. I hope that maybe you uh, gleaned something from this. Maybe if you didn't look at this plot line as much as other people, I know Toll the Hounds is the most decisive. Not decisive. It is the people are most split about this book versus any of the others. Toll the Hounds, yeah, most people either they love it or they hate it. It's their favorite or it's their least favorite. And I can understand both sides because I read fantasy for all of the reasons that a lot of people read it, which is that they love dragons and epic fight scenes and epic duels, like with Animander Rake and all those people. But then I also really enjoy how Steven Erikson weaves these very real ideas and themes into his books, and uh, I really enjoyed Toll the Hounds for that reason. Toll the Hounds is probably not my favorite novel in the series so far, I'm on Dust of Dreams currently, making my way through. I'm about a third of the way, maybe halfway through that at this point. I've been reading kind of slow recently. I haven't even been able to pick up Shadows Linger in recent times, but um the second Black Company book. But uh my favorite Malazan book is probably Reaper's Gale at this point. I love Reaper's Gale so incredibly much. I don't know why, but I just really enjoyed Reaper's Gale. But Toll the Hounds is great. Harllo is amazing, and I love all the myriad plot lines and plot threads that relate to his story. I hope that you enjoyed the video, and I hope that you have a good day.